What happens when money loses its meaning? What if the value of a dollar, a euro, or any currency simply vanished overnight? We tend to think of hyperinflation as a problem that happens in faraway countries or distant times, but the reality is much closer than we might like to believe. Whether it's Germany, Zimbabwe, or Venezuela, the rise and fall of hyperinflation has destroyed economies and ruined millions of lives. But history isn't just about what happened, it's about what comes next. In this video, we're going to look at the rise and fall of hyperinflation throughout history, and most importantly, what lessons we can learn to prevent it from happening again. You will be shocked at how quickly it can unfold, and how unprepared many nations are for what comes after. Hyperinflation is not just a financial event, it's a collapse of trust in a country's monetary system. It's when the value of money falls so quickly and so drastically that it becomes worthless. Prices skyrocket, savings evaporate, and entire economies crumble. It's an event that has happened repeatedly throughout history. But each time, it has been the same story. An economy running on debt, printing money to cover deficits until the currency eventually becomes meaningless. The world saw one of the first instances of modern hyperinflation in the aftermath of World War I. Germany, deeply in debt after the war, began printing money to pay its reparations and fund its reconstruction. This set the stage for one of the most famous cases of hyperinflation in history. Germany in the 1920s offers one of the clearest lessons in hyperinflation. After World War I, Germany was in ruins. The Treaty of Versailles demanded reparations that the country could not pay. The government's solution? Start printing money to fund those payments. And at first it seemed like a viable plan. But soon, the money started losing its value. By 1923, the situation was catastrophic. The German mark, the currency that had once been relatively stable, was worth almost nothing. Prices doubled every few days, and by November of that year, a loaf of bread in Berlin cost over 200 billion marks. People carried their money in wheelbarrows, and pensioners saw their savings vanish in the blink of an eye. Why did this happen? The key factor was that money had been detached from real value. The government had printed money to pay off debt, but without the backing of gold or any tangible asset, the money became a lie. The government didn't have the resources to back up the printed notes, and so the currency collapsed. But the people who survived were the ones who had assets, gold, land, or anything tangible. Those who trusted in paper money were left with nothing. The first lesson we can learn from Germany is hyperinflation is simple. Never print money without real value backing it. In the case of Weimar Germany, the government printed more and more money to cover its debts, and in doing so, it destroyed the value of the currency. But this is a pattern that has repeated itself throughout history. Hyperinflation happens when governments lose credibility in their financial system. They print more money to cover unsustainable debts, and when the population loses trust in the currency, prices soar. The more money that's printed, the less value it holds. This creates a vicious cycle of economic collapse. Fast forward to the 2000s, and we see the same story playing out in Zimbabwe. The country's economy was already in trouble, but it was the government's decision to print money to cover its budget deficits that sent it spiraling into disaster. In the early 2000s, Zimbabwe had a growing agricultural sector, but land reforms and political instability crippled production. By 2007, inflation in Zimbabwe had reached 231 million%. That's not a typo, 231 million%. Prices doubled every 24 hours. People could no longer afford basic goods. The Zimbabwean dollar became practically worthless. A loaf of bread would cost several billion Zimbabwean dollars. Zimbabwe's hyperinflation didn't just destroy wealth, it also shattered the social fabric. As the currency became worthless, people turned to barter, using foreign currency to conduct transactions. The government eventually abandoned the Zimbabwean dollar altogether, and people started using US dollars and South African rand. But for ordinary people, it was too late. Savings, pensions, and earnings had disappeared. The second lesson from Zimbabwe is clear. Hyperinflation is often tied to political instability. In both Germany and Zimbabwe, hyperinflation was a direct result of the government's economic mismanagement, whether from the need to pay war reparations or from political power struggles. When governments lose control over both the economy and their people's trust, hyperinflation becomes inevitable. In these situations, it's not just the government that suffers, it's the people. The poor, the middle class, and those on fixed incomes are often the first to feel the pain. Meanwhile, the elites and those with access to real assets like land or foreign currency can often survive or even thrive. Moving into the 2010s, we can see the same patterns emerging in Venezuela. In the early years of the 21st century, Venezuela was a wealthy nation thanks to its oil exports. But years of mismanagement, corruption, and a sharp drop in oil prices left the country vulnerable. To make up for the shortfall in government revenue, Venezuela's government began printing massive amounts of money. By 2018, Venezuela's inflation rate reached 1,000,000%. As the currency collapsed, so did the country's economy. Once thriving industries like oil were decimated, basic goods like food and medicine became scarce. But Venezuela's story is also a warning about how quickly hyperinflation can escalate. While the bolivar became worthless, a black market economy emerged, with people trading in foreign currencies like the US dollar. Like in Zimbabwe, the government's printing press had stolen the country's wealth, and the poorest were hit hardest. The third lesson from Venezuela's experience is that hyperinflation doesn't just destroy money, it destroys entire societies. It affects everyone from ordinary citizens to businesses. Savings are wiped out, wages become meaningless, and social unrest follows. In countries like Venezuela or Zimbabwe, hyperinflation often leads to food riots, protests, and massive emigration. When the currency becomes worthless, it doesn't just hurt your bank account, it destroys your future. People who had spent decades building a comfortable life are suddenly forced to flee, searching for opportunities elsewhere. So, what can we learn from these historical examples? How can we prepare for a world where inflation can spiral out of control? First, it's essential to diversify your wealth. In times of crisis, people with assets, whether it's gold, land, or even cryptocurrency, are more likely to survive. We saw this in Germany when the wealthy had gold. And we saw it again in Venezuela when those who had foreign currency managed to weather the storm. Second, hold on to real value. When paper money becomes worthless, tangible assets like real estate, gold, and precious metals hold their value. This is a lesson we should all take seriously as we see global debts rise and central banks continue to print money at unprecedented levels. Hyperinflation. This may seem like a distant threat, but the reality is, it's a global problem. With rising debts, political instability, and economic challenges facing major countries, hyperinflation could happen anywhere. The lessons of the past aren't just historical curiosities, they are warnings. If we don't learn from the mistakes of the past, we might find ourselves repeating them. The question is, when the next financial crisis hits, will you be prepared? Or will you find yourself like millions before, watching as your wealth disappears, piece by piece? If this video gave you new insights into the dangers of hyperinflation, don't forget to subscribe for more financial lessons from history. Remember, history has the answers if you know where to look.